Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are on the Glacial Lake playing as the forces of the Skaven against the forces of the Beastmen. And for this matchup, I wanted to try out a simple rat rush. And no fancy doom wheel, or, well, there is a doom wheel in here, but no fancy sort of warp doom flare or anything like that. We simply wanted to bring in some weapons teams, have some fun, and see what we can make work with some not so popular units. So for my lord, I am running Ikit Claw. Not much to be said for him. He's still very strong, even after there's nerfs to the brass orbs. Now they do have a cool sort of wind-up time, so you can't just immediately cast it and mess up a unit, but still, it's a very potent spell. And of course, just having a lord on a doom wheel is very, very strong. It gives you great mobility. Gives you some great utility, gives you terror, all that's good stuff. So it's very, very nice. We also do have Storm Demon on him, which is great for either pressuring single targets, because it's like basically like an Amber Spear. Otherwise, you can delete elites with it very, very effectively. Unlimited power for the extra winds of magic. Death Frenzy to boost our troops' melee attack and weapon damage. Warp Lightning to delete blocked up infantry. And Musk of Fear, because we are trying to stack leadership debuffs. We've got Fear, Terror, we got Musk of Fear. And then we've also got a whole bunch of other stuff. We got Plague Mist and Severity in the front line. 3 units of them. One of them is the Regiment of Renown, Blightscab's Plague Pack, and these guys have the Contaminated effect. So that's going to be another -10 leadership. And on top of that, we've got Warp Fire Thrower teams. So these guys have the Burnt status effect, if we look here. So that is going to be a further -8. So potentially we've got -22 leadership just between casting and the debuffs. And on top of that, you're going to be debuffing enemies because you're hopefully making them lose in melee. We've got Fear and Terror on Ikit Claw, and then we do have just the fact that we're doing missile damage, that you're taking missile damage is another debuffed leadership. So overall, I was hoping to sort of bunker bust my opponent's leadership and cause a quick rout. And for the rest of the build, well, it's simply there to enable that. A bunch of Clarinet Spears on the flanks, mostly there to deter Minotaurs, who I figured would be a big threat to this build. A whole bunch of Clarinet Spears and some Skaven Slaves on the flanks. A whole bunch of Skaven Slave Slingers, once again, mostly to counter Minotaurs, because their pebbles, while not very powerful, do have the quantity to sort of overwhelm Minotaurs. And then 3 Rat Ogres to provide us with sufficient mass to prevent my opponent from just plowing through. Now, my opponent here, though, did decide to sort of pincer me. Now, of course, Glacial Lake is a very small map. It's very compact, and so he's got half his army Vanguard deployed behind me, and it's a bunch of Goreherd with shields, including the renowned Blackhorn Ravagers, as well as 2 Chaos Warhounds ready to dive in on my backline. In the meantime, from the front, he does have Minotaurs, including Butcher the Falcon Guard over there. Normal Minotaurs with shields over there. The Regiment of Renown Destroys Dracwald over here to protect the Eye of Moresleep, as well as Malagor the Dark Omen ready to spawn Vile Tide, as well as, of course, summon Cygor summons. And personally, I think this is a bit of a misplay. My opponent was looking to do range damage with the Cygors, and of course they're much cheaper now because they don't last very long. But the simple fact is, you're gonna have a rough time getting that much value out of a Cygor nowadays. So they just don't last long enough. Now, unfortunately, my Warp Fire Throwers, who are my sort of, not as an ace in the hole, but I was looking to test out. These guys did get a buff last patch, an extra 30 armor. I was hoping to get some fun with them. Well, it's not happening because, unfortunately, they're getting nuked by the Cygor. In the meantime, though, we are sort of pressuring my opponent, running forward. And in the back line, I've kind of pivoted around, engaged my opponent with the Rat Ogres, with the Skaven Slaves, throwing a few trash units into the fray, as well as the Rat Ogres, because the Rat Ogres just hit like trucks and are able to really melt these boys down. And we're actually able to rat off some units. So you can see these Chaos Warhounds here, I do believe, actually flee the field because they're so close to the map edge. And in the meantime, I'm stringing out my opponent's Goreherd here and just rolling forward. You can see the Ungors breaking under the pressure. Over here, Ikit stacked on top of the Blightscab's Plague Pack is overwhelming these Minotaurs. And this is actually a big misplay on my part, not because I'm hitting this guy or hurting him, but because right at this moment, what I should have been doing is casting Death Frenzy and making my units so much more powerful in melee, and I completely forgot about it and kind of just didn't do it. So sure, the Plague Pack here, especially with the rear attacks on the Minotaurs, is going to melt them very, very efficiently, but unfortunately not as much damage as I'd like. Meantime, you can see the Warp Fire Throwers here doing some damage to the I have Moresleep, definitely doing a little bit of work, but in the meantime, my opponent is getting another Cygor summon and still pursuing me with those Goreherds, so life is very, very grim at the moment. That said, the Minotaurs with shields are getting overwhelmed. You can see the Butchers swing around from this flank, looking to get some damage, but they are just being intercepted. There's a whole bunch of distractions, and the battlefield is very much a mixed bag right now. We managed to rout off a bunch of Goreherd. Our Rat Ogres alongside the Skaven Slaves are kind of trumping the Goreherd, Ravagers over there. It's just a mess all over the battlefield. Over here, Ikit alongside the Blightscab's Plague Pack and all those boys has run over the Minotaurs, which is really, really nice. In the meantime, the Butchers of Kalkengard sort of sitting around looking pretty. My opponent kind of pausing for a moment, and in that moment, we're going to take advantage of the distraction, dive in with the Blightscab's Plague Pack, who are going to start dicing them up. And Blightscab's Plague Pack, the nice thing about Sitzer Bears, and they're not the greatest unit in my opinion, but the nice thing about them is that they do hit very, very hard on the charge. And in the meantime, we are able to sort of charge through. You can see Ikit here pursuing the Minotaurs, pursuing the Ungor Raiders, just plowing through alongside these Clanrat Spears, just applying constant pressure, looking to remove my opponent's units from play. Over here, the Warpfire Throwers did get ordered to fire, I do believe, but they're just getting overwhelmed, and I'm not entirely sure what is up here. They're just getting distracted, not firing, so just bogged out animations or something there, and it's not working. Over here, the Warpfire Thrower is doing some damage to the Butchers, and they're actually going to do bonus damage because they do fire on top of the magical damage. So fire against regen, of course, is advantageous. Unfortunately, Terror does kick in, and it's forcing my Skaven slaves off. But you can see there the flames licking at the fronts of these Gorherd, doing some damage, though certainly nothing too impressive. But that leadership does break. It does actually buckle there, so definitely, or at least has dropped wavering. I do believe these guys routed, though perhaps I was mistaken. But you can see they're definitely being whittled down. Unfortunately, over here, leadership buckling as they're intercepted by the Gords. So simply, I wasn't able to defend my backline. But what can you do? In the meantime, Rat Ogre's running amok, and in the backline, this lone unit of Courageous Censer Bearers tying down the Eye of Moor's Leap, doing a lot of damage. Now, the Cygors did get a buff to their melee stats. They're now far better offensively. You can see 450 weapon strength. I also do believe they got a buff to their melee. I think it was melee attack, but I know they got some sort of buff besides that. Definitely to the melee attack. It might actually be what I think it was HP. So definitely it's brutal here, but they still have a very bad melee defense. So the Plaguewing Censer Bears, even in the protracted fight, are doing quite a bit of work. They are still above leadership levels where they'd rout. They are able to sort of crump the Eye of Moor's Leap, keep it tied down. And although it is able to net Ikit here, it's not firing, and that's very, very important. Over here in the backline, in the meantime, the Butchers of Kalkengard forced to rout. Unfortunately, some friendly fire going in, routing these Gorherd. My opponent really not in the best of spots. Finally, I do remember that I have Death Frenzy, which, you know, a moronic move on my part, forgetting that I have it, because that would have been huge earlier. But what can you do? We do manage to rout my opponent off there. These Plaguewing Censer Bears are kind of on the ropes, but still, the Blightscab's Plague Pack, very, very strong. Over here, Ikit is able to dive in, pressure dives Moor's Leap as well as Malagor, start routing them off. And at this point, Balance of Power is swinging pretty decisively in our favor because all over the battlefield, we've kind of got these isolated engagements going. And we're able to sort of pull back our Skaven Slave Slingers, who were distracting my opponent earlier, just by he was forced to pressure them. We're pincering with our Rat Ogres, getting rear charges, breaking that leadership. Unfortunately, Blackhorn Ravagers are just holding to the bitter end, which is really, really annoying. But what can you do? We are able to disrupt these bad boys over here a little bit. The Plaguewing Censer Bears do dive in here against the Gorherd, but the fact is my opponent did chevron these bad boys up. Their leadership is fairly high right now. And the Censer Bears are already kind of exhausted and falling apart, so they're not going to be able to do too much. You can see that they have gained 2 chevrons over the course of the game, slinging it out with the Eye of Moor's Leap, so definitely proving their mettle, but it's just going to be too little too late. They're not really optimized for fighting something like Gorherd either, because it's a very squishy infantry unit. So what can you do? It's not really their forte. They're much better against armor. That said, we are going to take good old Ikit here and start pursuing Malagor, looking to assassinate him. Of course, Beastmen leadership is their weakness. On the periphery, the Minotaurs, we tried to pursue them off the field with Clan Rats. It didn't really work, but now we are just swarming them, dragging them down. They're falling under a tide of rats. Minotaurs with shields, definitely a very, very potent unit. Just very high melee defense for a monster. Very good stats overall, but they are going to fall there eventually. We do drop a Warp Lightning here, trying to nuke these Gorherd, but not doing very much. And as the match comes to a close, you do see Ikit firing off a Storm Demon there. And actually does about 700 damage. It's enough to knock my opponent down out of the Balance of Power, and it is a full shatter. So GG for the forces of the Skaven. Now, unfortunately, as much as I wanted to get that Wombo combo, it didn't happen this game. Certainly, that's not to say there was no value generated by the Warpfire Throwers, but most of it was just distraction. My opponent was super just focused on them with Gorherd and with Blackhorn Ravagers and initially the dogs, and they just couldn't really protect them. I do want to mention that the kill counts here are a bit misleading. Obviously, the Plaguewing Censer Bears, if you look at this, it looks like they did nothing. But fact of the matter is, Plaguewing Censer Bears were thrown into the toughest fights against the Minotaurs. They were thrown in against the Destroyers of Dracula, which I guess isn't exactly degenerate fights. One of them literally spent almost the entire game fighting the Eye of Moor's Leap and buying us time, so that was a huge win that didn't really generate kills. That said, you know, the Plaguewing Censer Bears did pretty well. Unfortunately, this wasn't like a place where you could really showcase their line busting, because my opponent didn't really bring much of a line, and I kind of ignored all of his infantry and just charged into the Minotaurs and Ungors and those sorts of units. So unfortunately that was what it was. The Rat Ogres got much better kill counts because they were running amok among the Gore Herd and doing so much work there. Ikit also not generating that many kills, though he ran over a lot of Ungors and that sort of thing. The Slingers, you know, they did some work. They definitely mostly acted as a distraction, because the thing is, keep in mind, every Gore Herd that's wasting its time chasing Skaven slaves, and we can see we had 1,600 units there, and every unit of Gore Herd that was wasting its time chasing after my Skaven slaves was essentially 400 gold off the field for my opponent. And he had like 2 or 3 units of Gores chasing Skaven slave slingers. So that was almost like a tenth of his army that wasn't doing anything. Like, sure, it was distracting a tiny amount of shooting, but that shooting was not going to decide the game, really. It was kind of ignorable, I think. I do think that my opponent would have had much better odds if he just lined up and faced me head-to-head, but this was definitely a little bit of a gimmicky build, and it just didn't work out. That said, like I mentioned, I just didn't get much value out of the Warpfire Throws. I'll keep trying them out. I think the unit has some potential. I don't actually think it's a bad unit per se now. It's very cheap. You do have some armor. It does have that leadership debuff, but yeah, we'll see. One thing I do want to mention is that I didn't use Death Frenzy this game, really. I used it once, and I really should have used it early on. In that initial fit engagement, when we were just trying to crush those Minotaurs very, very quickly, Death Frenzy would have made all the difference in the world. I didn't have good targets for Warp Lightning, so I couldn't really use that spell anyway, and what I would have been so much better off with is dropping Death Frenzy, wiping those Minotaurs, blitzing the Ungors off the field, and then that would have suddenly freed up so much of my resources to deal with other things, like the Gores and the isolated Cygor and that sort of thing. Regardless, though, well played to my opponent. Definitely was a sort of fun build, though not what I would recommend for sure. I do think he was worried about Jezzails and that sort of thing. But personally, I think if you're concerned about warp block Jezzails and that sort of thing, you need to blob and rush together. Because Skaven can bring a lot of trash, muck you up. They can bring Rat Ogres. This sort of Vanguard is not going to cut the mustard. Maybe if you did like a mass Vanguard with cavalry, you could pull it off. But even then, you're gambling a lot. If your opponent like corner camps or something, it's not going to work out. So I personally just think you're better off coming from one direction altogether. Maybe just have a few distraction cavalry, like you'd have these hounds on the flanks. Run in with all these Gores, have your Minotaur stacked on top of them. I probably wouldn't bother with the East Ungors or the Iron Morslip, to be quite honest with you guys. But if you were going to bring them, sure. I just think that was a better take on it, though. Regardless, well played. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it entertaining, and hopefully enjoyed seeing some Plague Monk Sensor Bearer action, because they're a unit you don't see very often. Personally, I'm not the hugest fan. I think it's a somewhat subpar unit. Not as bad as it used to be. It has gotten some slight tweaks in the past patches, but still subpar for the cost. But, you know, it's fun to try stuff out, to experiment a little bit and try new things. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, don't hesitate to post them. I will do my very best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.